The obsidian throne room of Draconis Prime gleamed under bioluminescent panels that floated like captured stars against the vaulted ceiling. Prince Kale hung suspended in the center of the chamber, his massive draconic form floating within a transparent anti-gravity field. His scales shimmered with an obsidian black color, and veins of molten gold ran through them like rivers of fire frozen in time. His wings, vast and powerful, hung limp at his sides like broken promises. His legs, thin and withered beneath his enormous body, dangled uselessly in the empty air. He had been hanging this way for 237 years. The Dragon Emperor stood before a holographic display, his ancient scales glinting bronze in the chamber's light. He was reviewing reports of a human vessel that had crashed on the colony's northern continent just 3 days ago. His eyes, which had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, burned with a mixture of wisdom and calculation. Beside him stood General Croth, whose scales bristled with aggression as he spoke. "They must be executed, sire," Croth hissed, his claws scraping against the stone floor. "Humans are unpredictable creatures. They are dangerous. They cannot be trusted. Every one of them that breathes is a threat to our empire." The Emperor listened without responding immediately. He had learned patience over centuries. Finally he spoke, his voice deep and resonant like distant thunder. "One shall be spared," he declared. "Assign them to Prince Kale's chamber. Perhaps an outsider's perspective will provide some form of amusement for the boy. He has grown far too silent in recent years." General Crotha's eyes widened in surprise, but he bowed and left to carry out the order. In the palace corridors, a young human woman named Eleanor was being escorted by armored dragon guards whose claws clicked against the marble floors with each step. She had copper-red hair tied back practically against her head, and intelligent green eyes that observed everything around her with careful attention. She moved with the bearing of someone accustomed to solving problems, to thinking her way through impossible situations. On her previous life, she had been a xenobiologist and systems engineer on the survey mission that had crashed. She was one of only 3 humans who had survived the impact. Eleanor had volunteered to be assigned to the palace when the guards had offered her a choice between execution or service. She had chosen service not out of fear alone, but out of curiosity. She wanted to understand this alien species, their culture, their technology. She wanted to survive, yes, but she also wanted to learn. The guards led her through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past chambers filled with strange technology and dragon artifacts that glowed with inner light. Finally, they stopped before enormous doors carved with symbols Eleanor did not recognize. The doors slid open silently, revealing the prince's chamber. Eleanor gasped despite her effort to remain composed. The chamber was massive, easily the size of an entire building. At its center floated Prince Kale, suspended in what Eleanor immediately recognized as an anti-gravity field. She had studied dragon technology during the survey mission. She understood some of how it worked, though not all of it. The prince was magnificent and tragic all at once. His scales caught the light like polished obsidian, and the golden veins seemed to pulse with their own inner radiance. His wings were folded against his sides, their membrane work translucent and delicate despite their enormous size. But his legs were thin, almost skeletal, withered from disuse. His eyes, however, were sharp and intelligent, observing Eleanor with curiosity. Eleanor stepped forward slowly, moving with respect rather than fear. She bowed with genuine courtesy, the kind of bow one gives to a fellow intelligent being rather than the exaggerated bow a servant might offer. The guards who had escorted her withdrew from the chamber, sealing the doors behind them. "My name is Eleanor," she said clearly, speaking in the common trade language that dragon and human diplomats used. "I have been assigned to serve you, Your Highness. I will do my best to fulfill whatever duties you require." Kale's eyes, amber and intelligent, focused on her with an expression that seemed almost shocked. His entire life, servants had come and gone, always bowing low, always speaking to him with excessive formality and hollow respect. No one had ever spoken to him as though he were a person rather than a symbol. "You do not fear me," Kale observed, his voice deep and careful, as though he had not used it much in recent years. Eleanor considered her answer carefully. She could have lied and claimed fear to make herself seem more submissive. Instead she chose honesty. "Should I be afraid, Your Highness? You are suspended in a gravity field. You are currently in no position to harm anyone, even if you wish to do so." It was the most direct and honest thing anyone had said to Prince Kale in his entire life. For a moment he did not respond. Then, something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "No one has ever spoken to me that way," Kale said quietly. "Then perhaps, Eleanor replied, moving further into the chamber to examine the anti-gravity apparatus surrounding him. It is time that someone did. She studied the technology binding him, her xenobiologist's eye taking in every detail. The neural interfaces that connected to his brain, the energy conduits that powered the field, the ancient dragon technology that had kept him suspended for over 2 centuries. There was something about the system that struck her as not entirely correct, as though it was designed not just for support but for restraint. Eleanor turned back to face the prince. I have a great many questions, Your Highness. I hope you will not mind answering them. I find your situation quite interesting. Kale, who had spent 2 centuries in near total silence, found himself wanting to answer. Weeks passed slowly in Prince Kale's chamber, and the rhythm of days began to change. Eleanor arrived each morning with meals prepared in the palace kitchens, though she often found that Kale barely touched the food. Instead, he wanted to talk. He wanted to ask questions about Eleanor's life, her world, her experiences on the human survey ship. He wanted to understand how a human mind worked, how humans approached problems differently than dragons did. Eleanor brought meals, maintained the chamber's systems, cleaned and organized, and did what countless dragon servants had never done before. She treated Kale not as a helpless invalid to be pitied or a symbol to be revered, but as a person worthy of genuine conversation. She asked him questions about his thoughts, his feelings, his dreams. She listened to his answers with real attention rather than polite indifference. One evening, as Eleanor adjusted the chamber's environmental controls, making sure the temperature and humidity remained stable for Kale's comfort, the prince asked her a question that had been troubling him. Why are you here? Kale asked, his voice carrying a weight of genuine curiosity. In this palace. In this role. Humans could be anywhere else in the galaxy. You could have chosen any path available to you. Yet you chose to serve a dragon prince you had never met before. Why? Eleanor paused in her work, her hands still on the control panel. She considered the question carefully, knowing that Kale deserved an honest answer rather than a simple or convenient one. She turned to face him, and when she spoke, her voice was thoughtful and measured. My entire life, Eleanor began, I have been fascinated by how systems work. When I was young, I took things apart to understand them. Machines, technology, devices of all kinds. As I grew older, I realized that living creatures are also systems. Complex, beautiful systems that operate according to patterns and principles we can learn to understand. My ship was exploring because I wanted to discover new systems, to learn how different species solve problems, how they built their civilizations. She moved closer to the anti-gravity apparatus surrounding Kale, studying it with her analytical eyes. You are a system too, Your Highness. An elegant one, I can see that just by looking at the technology supporting you. But you are also a system that has been constrained, limited, trapped by its own circumstances and perhaps by others' decisions about what those circumstances should mean. Kale was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was bitter and heavy with the weight of centuries. I'm not a system. I am a prisoner. I've been a prisoner my entire life. My father has tried everything to help me. The best healers in the Dragon Empire have examined me. The oldest and most powerful technologies have been applied to my condition. But there is no cure for genetic failure. That is simply what I am. A failure. Eleanor looked up at him, and something fierce flickered in her green eyes. There is no cure, she said, agreeing with him, but that does not mean there is no solution. Humans have solved similar problems for thousands of years. When people lose the use of their legs, we do not keep them suspended in fields forever, watching their muscles waste away. We retrain them. We rebuild them. We work with the body they have and help it become stronger. But humans are not dragons, Kale said, though his tone suggested he was open to hearing more rather than dismissing her entirely. Our physiology is different. Our needs are different. Yes, Eleanor agreed. But the basic principles of adaptation remain the same. If muscles are not used, they weaken. But if they are used gradually, carefully, and consistently, they can be rebuilt. Your body is not broken, Your Highness. It is simply untrained. Kale wanted to dismiss her words as naive fantasy, the hopeful thinking of someone who did not understand the reality of his situation. But something in Eleanor's voice, something in the way she spoke with such absolute certainty, made him want to believe. For the first time in centuries, he felt something other than resignation and acceptance of his fate. He felt a small, fragile spark of hope. How? Kale asked quietly. How would such a thing even begin? Eleanor's expression changed, becoming focused and intense. I would need to study your technology more carefully. I would need to understand exactly how the anti-gravity field works, what neural patterns it maintains, how it interacts with your physiology. My crashed ship has resources that could be useful. Lightweight composite materials, advanced servo systems, technology that might work in combination with dragon engineering. Over the following weeks, Eleanor's behavior changed in subtle ways. She began spending her off hours not resting but studying. She sketched diagrams in a small notebook she kept hidden in her quarters. She ran calculations on a salvaged human device that she kept concealed. She examined Kale's neural patterns more carefully, learning how the anti-gravity field communicated with his brain. Her crashed ship's salvage accumulated in her quarters, carefully hidden from curious eyes. Lightweight composite materials, servo systems, power cells, neural interface components. One night, after she had ensured that no guards were watching her movements, Eleanor presented her complete proposal to Kale. She had created detailed schematics showing a hybrid harness, a framework that would combine dragon technology with human engineering in ways that neither species had ever attempted before. A hybrid harness, Eleanor explained, pointing to her drawings. We would gradually transfer your weight from the anti-gravity field to your own strengthening body. We would begin with just a few ounces of pressure on your legs, and increase it slowly over weeks and months. There would be muscle stimulation protocols, neural retraining sequences, carefully designed exercise routines. It would hurt, Your Highness. The pain would be significant at first. It would be exhausting. You would probably fail multiple times before you succeeded. She paused, letting her words settle before she continued. But if it works, Eleanor said, her voice growing stronger and more certain, then you will walk. Then you will fly. Then you will choose your own life instead of having it chosen for you by circumstance and tradition and the decisions of others. For the first time in centuries, Kale felt something other than the cold resignation that had defined his existence. He felt hope. And alongside the hope he felt terror. If we are discovered, he whispered, understanding the danger they would face, my father will have you executed. Eleanor smiled, and her smile was calm and certain. Then we do not get discovered, she said simply. The abandoned eastern wing of the palace became their sanctuary, a place where no guards walked and no servants ventured. It was a section of the ancient fortress that had been sealed off decades ago when the Empire's center of power had shifted to newer, more modern chambers. Dust lay thick on the floors and strange shadows filled the corridors. Eleanor had discovered it while exploring the palace during her first weeks of service, and she had kept its existence secret, waiting for the right moment to use it. She transformed one of the large empty chambers into a training space. Eleanor carried salvaged materials from her crashed ship piece by piece, small enough that no one would notice her smuggling them through the palace corridors. Lightweight composite materials, servo systems, power cells, neural interface components. She combined these with components she carefully extracted from the palace's mechanical systems, things so small that their absence went unnoticed. The harness she constructed was unlike anything either dragon or human technology had ever created before. It was a framework of dragon alloy, strong and flexible, combined with human composite materials that were lighter than they had any right to be. The device could gradually transfer Kale's weight from the anti-gravity field to his own body, increasing the load incrementally as his muscles grew stronger. It was beautiful in its complexity and ingenious in its design. The night Eleanor brought Kale to the abandoned chamber for the first time, he was terrified. She had disabled his anti-gravity field for the first time in 237 years, and the sensation was overwhelming. Gravity pulled at him like an angry hand, and he hung suspended in Eleanor's carefully constructed support harness, trembling with the unfamiliar sensation. The first training session, Eleanor announced, her voice firm and calm, begins now. She positioned the harness so that only the smallest fraction of Kale's weight pressed against his own legs. Perhaps a few ounces, nothing more. But to his dormant muscles, those few ounces felt like the weight of mountains. Kale's legs screamed in protest. Every nerve ending, every dormant muscle fiber, every connection that had gone unused for 2 centuries suddenly sparked back to life. The pain was extraordinary, overwhelming, almost unbearable. He tried to cry out, but Eleanor's voice cut through his agony. Breathe, she commanded. Deep breath in through your nose. Hold it. Now exhale slowly through your mouth. Kale tried to follow her instructions, but his body was in rebellion. Within seconds, his legs collapsed, unable to support even that tiny fraction of his weight. He dropped back into the full support of the harness, gasping for breath, his entire body trembling. It is impossible, Kale gasped, his voice shaking with pain and despair. I cannot do this. My body is too weak. I have been suspended too long. Eleanor's expression did not soften with sympathy. Instead, her eyes hardened with determination. It is not impossible, she said firmly. It is hard. There is a significant difference between those two things. Hard means difficult. Impossible means cannot be done. This can be done. I know it can. Now, again. Day after day they returned to the abandoned chamber. Eleanor taught Kale breathing techniques from her homeworld, ancient methods that human cultures had developed over thousands of years to calm the mind and focus energy. She explained the biology of muscle memory, how neural pathways that had been dormant could be reactivated, how his ancient draconic physiology was actually far more adaptable than he believed it to be. She talked about how human athletes retrain their bodies after injury, how consciousness could override pain through focused intention. The training was agonizing and relentless. Eleanor increased the weight Kale had to support by tiny increments, just a few ounces at a time. Minutes of weight-bearing became half hours. Half hours became hours. The pain gradually lessened as the muscles adapted, as the neural connection strengthened, as Kale's body remembered what it meant to support itself. One afternoon something miraculous happened. Kale's massive wings twitched for the first time in centuries. The movement was involuntary at first, just a reflex, but Eleanor recognized its significance immediately. Your wings, she said, excitement clear in her voice. The dormant nerve endings are reawakening. This is excellent progress. Over the following weeks, muscle fibers that had atrophied slowly began to strengthen. The atrophy was not permanent damage, Eleanor explained, but simply disuse. The fibers were still there, just sleeping. And they could wake up. The golden veins beneath Kale's scales seemed to glow brighter as his body began to regenerate and rebuild itself. Then one evening, Eleanor's friend Thomas arrived at the abandoned chamber. Thomas was a maintenance worker who had befriended Eleanor during her early weeks in the palace. He was a weathered man with kind eyes and practical skills, someone who knew how the palace's systems worked. His face was creased with worry. We have a problem, Thomas said quietly. Prince Morven suspects something. He was seen near this wing yesterday. If he investigates further, if he discovers what you are doing here, everything will be exposed. Kale's heart sank. His younger brother, Prince Morven, was everything Kale was not. Morven walked freely. Morven flew without effort. Morven was being groomed to lead the empire. Surely Morven would report this secret training, would tell the emperor immediately. But Prince Morven appeared that very evening, and his reaction was not what anyone expected. The younger prince's scales were emerald green, and his bearing was proud but conflicted. He studied Kale standing with Eleanor's support, then looked at Eleanor herself, understanding the truth immediately without needing any explanation. I could report this, Morven said quietly, his voice thoughtful rather than threatening. Father would want to know immediately. You could, Eleanor agreed, not backing down from his gaze, not showing fear despite the danger she faced. But I suspect you will not. Morven's shoulders sagged with the weight of secrets he had been carrying. Father has always assumed I wanted the weight of empire leadership, he said softly. But I never asked for it. I never wanted to rule alone, to carry all responsibility myself. He looked at his brother with an expression filled with complex emotion. I want this. I want you to walk. I want you to be free. I want my brother back. Morven became their guardian and protector. Using his access to the palace's restricted areas and his authority as a prince, he created false maintenance reports and redirected guards away from the eastern wing. He brought supplies to their secret training space and stood watch while Eleanor and Kale worked together. The three conspirators, an unlikely partnership of a human woman, a dragon prince, and a dragon maintenance worker, worked in secret through the nights and hidden hours, moving steadily toward a transformation that would shake the foundations of their entire world. 3 months had passed since Eleanor and Kale began their secret training in the abandoned eastern wing. 3 months of pain, exhaustion, determination, and slow but steady progress. Kale's legs, once thin and withered like dried branches, had begun to show definition. Muscle had returned to his frame. The golden veins beneath his scales pulsed with renewed vitality. His wings had regained much of their former strength and responsiveness, though he had not yet attempted true flight. Eleanor had spent the entire night preparing the final test. She moved quietly through the palace corridors, carrying equipment salvaged from her crashed ship and components she had carefully extracted from the palace's systems over the past weeks. No one stopped her. Thomas had made certain that the guards in this section of the palace were reassigned elsewhere, and Morven had erased any record of her movements from the security systems. The hangar she had chosen was designed for weapons testing, a vast and empty chamber that stretched the length of 3 normal buildings. The ceiling soared overhead, easily high enough for a dragon to fly. The chamber was sealed, its entrance locked with a code that only Eleanor now knew. Here, in this isolated space, they could attempt what had seemed impossible just months ago. Cale arrived at the hangar with Eleanor's assistance. He was nervous, his scales flickering with colors that betrayed his emotional state. For the first time in 237 years, he was not suspended in an anti-gravity field. He walked on his own legs, though Eleanor kept a stabilizing hand on his shoulder. "Are you certain?" Cale asked, doubt wavering in his voice. "What if I cannot do this? What if my wings are still too weak?" "Then you will try again another day," Eleanor replied simply. "Failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of the process toward success." She guided him to the center of the hangar, a vast open space with nothing to obstruct his movements. Eleanor stepped back and removed the support harness that had been his constant companion during the training sessions. For the first time, Cale stood completely unsupported, his entire weight resting on legs that had once been useless. He trembled, but he stood. "Your wings," Eleanor said, her voice calm and encouraging. "Try them. Not for flying yet. Just try them." Cale spread his enormous wings. The membrane work stretched out, translucent and beautiful, catching the hangar's artificial light and transforming it into patterns of iridescent color. The wings were magnificent, powerful, and for the first time in centuries, responsive to his will. He beat them experimentally once, then twice. The air around him moved, creating currents that pushed against his body. Again, Eleanor encouraged. "Stronger this time." Cale beat his wings with greater force. The ground beneath him blurred slightly as the wind from his wings grew stronger. He could feel the power in those ancient muscles, could sense the connection between his mind and his body returning after centuries of disconnection. "Now," Eleanor said, her voice steady and certain, "fly." Cale's wings beat faster, harder, more purposefully. The ground beneath him began to recede. His feet left the hangar floor. For a moment, just a single moment, he hung suspended in the air through his own power rather than through the artificial support of technology. The sensation was overwhelming, extraordinary, indescribable. Then his flight pattern became erratic. His balance, never trained in actual flying, faltered. His wings beat awkwardly, creating turbulence that worked against him rather than carrying him forward. He spiraled toward the ground and crashed spectacularly into a stack of cargo containers, sending them clattering across the hangar floor in a cacophony of noise and chaos. For a moment there was silence. Then Cale laughed. The sound was extraordinary, a deep, rumbling laugh of pure joy and relief and triumph that echoed through the entire chamber like thunder. It was a sound that had never been heard from the prince before, a sound of genuine happiness, of liberation, of hope fulfilled. Eleanor ran to him, helping him to his feet. His scales were marked with dust from the containers, and one of his wings was bent at an awkward angle, but his eyes blazed with a joy that transcended all consideration of physical pain or imperfection. "I flew," Cale said, his voice filled with wonder. "I actually flew. For just a moment, but I flew." "You did," Eleanor agreed, her own smile reflecting his happiness. "And you will fly better each time you practice." But their celebration was cut short by the sound of enormous doors opening at the far end of the hangar. Eleanor's heart sank. They had been discovered. The Dragon Emperor entered the hangar, his bronze scales gleaming, flanked by armored guards whose weapons were drawn and ready. His expression was unreadable, his ancient eyes fixed on his son, standing on his own legs, dust covering his scales, his wings still slightly extended from the attempt at flight. Behind the Emperor came General Croth, his scales bristling with anger and outrage. Behind him came palace officials and council members, all of them staring at the prince with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. "Sire," Eleanor stepped forward immediately, moving to shield Cale as best she could with her small human body. "I engineered this rehabilitation protocol. This was entirely my doing. Prince Cale is innocent of any wrongdoing. I forced him into this training. He did not have a choice in the matter. The fault lies entirely with me. If punishment is to be given, it should be given to me alone." "Step aside," the Emperor commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Eleanor tensed, her body rigid with fear and determination to protect the prince. But Cale moved. He took a step forward, then another, walking deliberately toward his father. His legs were still weak, still unsteady, but they held him upright. He moved with effort and determination, each step a statement of will and independence. When he reached the Emperor, Kale stood as tall as his exhausted body would allow. His amber eyes met his father's ancient gaze directly. "No," Kale said, his voice carrying authority and strength that had never been present before. "I accept responsibility for my own choices. I asked Eleanor for help. I agreed to this training. I chose to attempt this flight. I am no longer asking permission to live my own life. I am declaring my independence. I am claiming my own agency. I will walk. I will fly. I will choose my own path, and I will do so on my own terms." The throne room fell into absolute silence. No one had ever spoken to the Dragon Emperor this way before. No one had ever dared to declare independence so directly, so firmly, so completely. The Emperor studied his son for a long, eternal moment. Then something shifted in his ancient expression. Understanding dawned. Regret flickered behind his eyes. And finally, something that looked like respect. 6 months had passed since that extraordinary moment in the hangar when Prince Kale had declared his independence before his father and the entire assembled court. 6 months since Eleanor had been freed from her role as a mere servant and appointed as an official advisor to the Dragon Emperor's throne. 6 months since the Dragon Empire had begun to change in ways both subtle and profound. The transformation did not happen overnight. The first weeks after Kale's public flight had been filled with uncertainty and conflict. General Croth had argued vehemently that Eleanor represented a threat to dragon society, that human influence would corrupt the ancient traditions and hierarchies that had sustained the empire for millennia. Many of the older council members had agreed with him, their scales bristling with resistance to change. But the Dragon Emperor had surprised everyone. He had studied Eleanor's hybrid technology carefully, had listened to her explanations of how human and dragon physiology could work together, how the combination of their different perspectives could produce innovations that neither species could achieve alone. And then he had made a decision that shook the foundations of dragon society. Eleanor's hybrid harness technology was refined and replicated throughout the empire. Dragons who had been injured in battle, who had been born with disabilities, who had been marginalized or exiled because they did not fit the narrow definitions of what a proper dragon should be, were suddenly offered rehabilitation instead of abandonment. The technology that had been created in secret to free one prince became the tool that liberated thousands of others. Kale, now publicly walking and occasionally flying, though still improving with each passing week, had begun introducing policies that prioritized capability over tradition. He established new councils that included voices from across dragon society, not just the ancient families and military generals. He created programs to identify talented individuals regardless of their physical status or social position. He challenged the rigid hierarchy that had defined the empire for centuries. Eleanor worked alongside the Dragon Emperor's council in official capacity now, her human perspective challenging centuries of assumptions and traditions. She questioned why things were done a certain way simply because they had always been done that way. She proposed alternative approaches to problems that dragon society had considered unsolvable. She and Thomas established a joint research facility where dragons and humans worked together as equals, collaborating on technological advancement and scientific discovery. The facility became a beacon of innovation. Marcus, a dragon engineer with brilliant mind and progressive thinking, had become Eleanor's primary collaborator. The two of them worked together through long hours, debating pressure coupling systems with enthusiastic intensity, designing new applications for hybrid technology, exploring possibilities that neither dragon nor human technology could have conceived of alone. One afternoon, Eleanor stood in her workspace bent over holographic schematics that glowed with soft blue light. The designs showed a spacecraft of extraordinary sophistication, combining the best of both dragon and human engineering. Marcus worked beside her, his emerald scales catching the light as he manipulated the holographic display, adjusting parameters and running calculations. "The power coupling here is still inefficient," Marcus observed, pointing to a section of the design. "We are losing approximately 12% of energy in the transfer process." Eleanor studied the problem, her analytical mind already working through possibilities. What if we reversed the polarity of the secondary coil? That might redirect the energy loss back into the system rather than allowing it to dissipate as heat. Marcus manipulated the hologram, making the adjustment. The simulations ran and the numbers shifted. Energy loss dropped to less than 4%. "Brilliant," Marcus said, genuine admiration clear in his voice. "How did you think of that?" "I learned it from watching how human neural systems work," Eleanor replied. "Efficiency often comes not from fighting against natural processes but from redirecting them toward productive ends." Kale visited Eleanor's workspace that afternoon, his arrival announced by the distinctive sound of his footsteps and the slight rustling of his wings as he moved. He had become more comfortable with public appearance over the past months, and fewer people stared at the prince who walked and flew on his own power. "I have something to show you," Eleanor said, looking up at him with an expression that mixed excitement with something deeper, something more personal. She gestured to the holographic display. "This is the design for the expedition vessel. The one we discussed months ago. The one that will explore the unmapped regions beyond the Veil Nebula." Kale studied the design with genuine interest. The ship was beautiful in its complexity, sleek and powerful, designed for both speed and endurance. It represented the culmination of months of collaboration and innovation. "When does it launch?" Kale asked. "Next week," Eleanor replied. "We are preparing the crew now. We need experienced pilots, skilled engineers, scientists who can handle unexpected situations, people who understand that they will be far from home, exploring territory that no one has mapped before." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of meaning that went beyond mere professional communication. "We need you, Your Highness. The expedition requires more than just your status as a prince. We need someone who understands what it means to overcome impossible limitations. We need someone who knows that strength is not what you are born with but what you choose to become." Kale's expression softened. He had spent his entire life trapped in suspension, unable to move, unable to choose, imprisoned by circumstances and by others' decisions about what those circumstances should mean. Now, for the first time, his future was genuinely his own to determine. "What would my role be?" Kale asked. "Would I go as a prince? Would I go as your colleague? Would I go as someone who is simply trying to discover what lies beyond the boundaries of what we know?" "You would go as yourself," Eleanor replied simply. "Someone who understands that the greatest journeys begin not when you finally know how to fly, but when someone believes you are capable of learning." Kale looked at Eleanor and then at Marcus and finally at the holographic display showing the ship that would carry them all into the unknown. His scales shimmered with color reflecting his emotions, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and certain. "Then let us go," he said. "Let us explore whatever awaits us beyond the Veil Nebula." As the expedition ship lifted from Draconis Prime 1 week later, Eleanor and Kale stood together on the observation deck. Behind them lay a transformed empire, ancient hierarchies challenged, impossible limitations overcome, a society beginning to question its most fundamental assumptions about strength and capability and worth. Before them lay infinite possibility, unmapped regions of space filled with mysteries yet to be discovered, adventures yet to be experienced, challenges yet to be faced. Sometimes the greatest transformations begin not when circumstances change, but when one person believes in another's capability to become more than they ever thought possible.